I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I'm just really, really shocked and thrilled and humbled to receive your generous gift. So thank you very much. So today I want to talk to you give a little bit of an intro and a background for me. I think it'll provide a little bit of context on why I'm the speaker and representative here today. I'd also like to share about our National Historic Landmark, the schooner Roseway. She's a really storied history, a remarkable story to tell, and I'm honored to get to share that story with you. I'll also talk to you about the work of World Ocean School. And this is we've done 13 seasons down here in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and so I'll tell you a little bit about how we got here and the work that we do, as well as the impact of our programs, and then perhaps not too surprising, the continued preservation and ongoing work to steward our historic landmark vessel. So to start, again, I'm Leonard. I am a farm girl from Oregon, actually. So it's a real fluke. 10 years ago, I would have said that it was impossible for me to be here in St. Croix and talking about a historic landmark, let alone running an organization like this. But it's a great privilege. So my background's actually in chemistry and mathematics, and through that I got into teaching. And through that, a friend of mine who I went to high school with had run into me before I was off on a backpacking trip, and she thought I was a little crazy for going on a backpacking trip and said, "You should go teach on my uncle's boat." And I thought, gosh, I get car sick. I'm not sure how I'm going to do on a boat. I'd never sailed a day in my life, and ended up agreeing to volunteer for 6 months. And that 6 months changed my life. And so that ended up turning into what ended up as 4 years living aboard the schooner Roseway. And my role evolved in those years. I took a brief step away from World Ocean School and worked back in Oregon, where my family are, with a couple of nonprofits there, and developed some of my nonprofit skills. And the board asked me to come back and help transition the organization. And I said I would do it under one. They mentioned something about succession planning, and I said, I'll come back as long as you don't think that I will take over. I will never take over for World Ocean School. And needless to say, 18 months later, I ended up taking the reins. So 2.5 years I've been running the World Ocean School, and it's an absolute privilege. It's an absolute challenge, but it is really a joy to get to do this work and have an opportunity not only to share the history of Roseway, but also to help develop and refine our programs and the impact that we have with students. I'm going to share just this photo briefly. This is one of the first transit I was on. I started in the New England area and made our way down to St. Croix, and we left in a nor'easter, and I'd never sailed a day in my life before this, and was absolutely mortified and thought that this was incredibly challenging, and I'd never been so wet in my life, and was uncomfortable, and I thought, what the heck did I sign myself up for? But coming down to St. Croix and working with students, and I'd never seen a better teaching tool, and so that's really what got me here and what's kept me here for these years. But the history of Roseway. So Roseway is a National Historic Landmark, as I mentioned. She was built in 1925 in Essex, Massachusetts as a Grand Banks fishing schooner. Now, there were thousands of Grand Banks fishing schooners built in Essex, and most were used commercially. And they wanted Grand Banks fishing schooners to be incredibly fast and incredibly seaworthy to fish the Grand Banks year-round. In this particular case, this wealthy gentleman in the middle, Harold Hathaway, wanted more of a yacht. He wanted her to be seaworthy, wanted her to be sound, just like those Grand Banks fishing schooners. But instead of fishing commercially, he wanted it more of a personal craft. The story is he actually didn't like the smell of cod. So most Grand Banks fishing schooners would actually fish in small dories. So dories would be stacked up on the deck of a boat like Roseway. They'd go out to the Grand Banks, they'd launch the dories, and they'd fish from the dories. And they'd bring the fish back, process it on board. There'd be ice on board that they'd store the fish in, and they wanted seaworthy vessels to be the first ones back to port to set the best price for the fish, but they also wanted to be back before their ice melted. So most of them were used for this purpose, but as I said, the rumor is Harold didn't like the smell of cod, and he wanted to catch swordfish, but he thought this type of vessel would be great. And the way they would do that is they'd actually send somebody aloft up on top of the mast, scouting for the swordfish, telling the captain where to go, and then they'd have somebody else on the pulpit hanging off of the bowsprit, and they'd harpoon the swordfish. Interestingly, they set a world record for the number of swordfish caught in a 24-hour period, which is 74, which is a huge number for this hobby, recreational, I want a yacht kind of guy. They were really determined and really working hard, and it's pretty incredible that they were able to do that. Harold was also a very interesting guy in that he took meticulous care of Roseway, and we think one of the reasons she's still around today is because of that meticulous care. The story is he actually had his crew wash coal off with soap and water before he brought it on board, so there was no dust. And part of that care really has helped the preservation. Also in the winter, he had a house built around her and was just really very meticulous. But he ended up selling her to the Boston Harbor pilots. And what's interesting about this, so first let me start, are any of you familiar with harbor pilots? So a couple of you. So harbor pilots are captains who know particular bodies of water really well. They're used to this day. Boston's a really interesting and complex port in that there are many islands and rocks and shoals. And to become a pilot, you basically have a blank chart and you fill in all the depths, every rock, every island, every shoal. And you know that harbor like the back of your hand. And the reason that pilots were used are used is it helps protect the cargo, and it helps protect the ship, and it helps protect the port. So if you think about particularly Boston today, for instance, if a ship were to wreck, there are tunnels underneath the harbor. And the destruction that could happen not only to the ecosystems and the harbor, but the consequences of that. So that type of rationale is part of the harbor pilot's history. But in terms of a schooner, the reason they wanted one was because they're incredibly seaworthy and incredibly sound to sail back and forth in front of Boston Light until ships would come in. And when a ship would come near, they would row, they'd have apprentices actually row the pilots onto those incoming vessels, and they'd climb up on board and guide them into port. So Roseway's job really was just to house pilots year-round outside of Boston Light for 10 days, and it would rotate with another vessel. And they loved Roseway. So they bought her. What's interesting about this is they bought her, and the sale went through and was reported in the Boston Globe on December 7th, 1941. A pretty important day. And so she was actually commissioned by the U.S. Coast Guard, and she turned into a Coast Guard reserve vessel. There was a machine gun placed on her bow, and she served not only in some pilot duties, but also patrolling the harbor. During wartime, they turned all the navigational aids off, and there was anti-submarine netting and mines, and so they needed vessels, friendly vessels, to guide other friendly vessels in. The other interesting thing that I actually just learned recently is that they loved schooners because when schooners are sailing, they're quiet. Right? They don't have an engine on, they're powered just by the wind. And so they would use them to sail through Massachusetts Bay because if there were U-boats, they would come up at night to run their generators. And the schooners could hear them and report their coordinates. So a really interesting other component to her wartime history. Fortunately, she was unscathed and returned to the Boston Harbor pilots. Now, what's interesting about the harbor pilots, I mentioned they loved her and they did this year-round. So there are some photos, and unfortunately I didn't incorporate them here, of the pilots coming back into port with feet of ice and snow on her. I mean, they were really rugged. It was really interesting, all sorts of weather. At one point, she went through a hurricane and was dismasted. Just really a rigorous and hard job. And the technology had changed and was evolving. And in ports around the country, they were using radio technology and power boats to shuttle pilots onto incoming vessels. But Boston was kind of stubborn and loved this history and continued to use Roseway. So much so, she was the last sailing pilot vessel in the United States in '73. So really interesting piece of her, and it has to do with just that she could withstand anything, and the pilots thought she was a really comfortable ride, and so if they had to be out there, they wanted to be on Roseway. So retired in 1973, and it's part of the reason for her National Historic designation. What's interesting is afterwards, she was passed through a few different hands. Some folks wanted to use her as a sword fishing boat, and so she had a little bit more time in that capacity. But then she was sold to a windjammer fleet, and this is her actually as a windjammer up in Maine. She was a part of a fleet of about 3 wooden boats at a time, and actually she came down to the Virgin Islands and did some windjammering down here. For those of you who are not familiar, a windjammer is basically an old-fashioned cruise ship. So the idea is folks would come on board, live in the cabins below, sail around to islands, have lobster bakes, enjoy just sailing, and be just a passenger carrying vessel. But she was, as I mentioned, a part of 3 old wooden boats, and old wooden boats are a lot of maintenance. There's a lot to take care of. There's a lot of work constantly. And one year when the Coast Guard came on board, they found a little bit of rot and said, "I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to take passengers." Well, if they couldn't take passengers, they couldn't earn any money. If they couldn't earn any money, they couldn't repair the damage, and ultimately Roseway was repossessed. So this is an interesting sort of part in her history. Repossessed, tied up at a dock by the Bank of Damariscotta. They tried to auction her off, and she just sat, neglected. So this is the part of the story where I want to share a little bit about how World Ocean School came about. Abby Kidder and Dwight Deckelman are our 2 founders. And Abby Kidder was working for the Institute for Global Ethics at the time, and her friend Dwight was building and restoring boats. And they were just talking about this concept, and they had for years, about teaching ethics and teaching community and teaching in a very experiential way on boats, and what an amazing platform this would be, particularly for community values and ethical decision making, was Abby's lens. And what's interesting is the 9/11 happened. And it really struck them that nonprofit work is hard, and there's never going to feel like there's enough money or the right time. But they really felt like that was pivotal for them in terms of saying, more than ever, we need students to understand the value of community and of contribution and building strong, healthy relationships. And let's do this. This is the time. So they founded World Ocean School and then started looking for a platform. And interestingly, they'd heard about Roseway and that she'd been repossessed by previous owners, and the bank kept trying to auction her off, and no one wanted her because she was an old wooden boat that couldn't take passengers. But Abby heard about her, and then she said, "That sounds a little familiar," and she went back into her journal. And this is Abby in the middle here. In September of 1982. She was on Roseway for her parents' wedding anniversary, and she thought, you know what, this is pretty serendipitous perhaps, and we're going to go to the bank. So they had created their letterhead, they put together a formal procedure and felt very proud, went into the bank and said, "We would love to talk to you about the schooner Roseway." And the bank actually, much to their surprise, said, "Fantastic. We'll give her to you for $10. What? Yeah. There's a couple of catches here. So first, Captain Dwight always said there's no such thing as a free wooden boat. And the bank, the other stipulation from the bank was you have 10 days to get her off our dock and get her insured, because her insurance was about to renew. And the bank didn't want anything to do with it. So they scrambled, and they got volunteers together, and they got a tugboat, and they got the insurance pulled together miraculously in 10 days. And this is the boat that they got for $10 in really pretty rough shape. So this was November 2002. She got pulled up to Rockland and got prepped for a yard period. It was a really big deal, and folks in the community actually really got behind them. And so there was a lot of support, a lot of volunteers, and they got to work on her. So here's a few clippings of the news in the area about revitalizing the ship and putting it to good use as an educational vessel. And what's interesting about the restoration, it was a huge, huge project. But they were able to do it in 18 months, and it cost $1.5 million. So on one hand, we look at that and we say, gosh, that's a lot of money and that's a lot of time. However, Roseway has a sister ship, the Schooner Adventure. And the Schooner Adventure was built the year after Roseway in the same yard. And she underwent a $4 million restoration that lasted 20 years. So for perspective, they were really determined. And they said, we've got to get her in the water and we've got to get her serving kids. And we'll do whatever we can to get her seaworthy. And they begged and they borrowed and they did whatever they could to get her going again. So here's a few shots of her in various states of restoration. Everything that they could, they kept, and everything they needed to, they replaced. So she's still made of white oak. What's interesting is most of her below the water line was able to be preserved, but most above decks needed to be replaced. If you do have a chance to come on board Roseway, which I hope you will, in the main salon, there's a section there where you can see some original woodwork from 1925, which is pretty neat. But lots of water damage on the surface levels, and so all that, some of the aesthetic stuff needed to be replaced. So this is Roseway when she was just getting her masts in 2005. So a major effort, and it was 18 months, but it took a lot of work, a lot of volunteer efforts to get her going and seaworthy again. But then they said, oh my gosh, we've got this education to do. And what are we going to do with kids? So they got her sailing and started thinking about programming and thinking about Boston-based programming because of her history. But they weren't entirely sure, and they learned pretty quickly that kids in Boston do not want to go sailing in the wintertime. So this is really where our history comes in. So they had a captain who decided to sail her down to the Virgin Islands and said, he had run a charter business out of St. Thomas and St. John, and said, I love those waters, I know them very well, let's go down there, charter the boat, earn some money for the school, and go back up to New England and do educational programs there. So that was the goal. They sailed her down, but it turns out there wasn't a great space for her to go in St. Thomas and St. John. She's very big. We're draw 12.5 feet, so we need depth of water, and Havenza was here, and the fuel was cheaper, and so they decided to come to St. Croix to fuel up. And they ended up on the fuel dock, and while they were waiting for fuel, actually for the fuel truck, some folks approached them and said, any chance you're one of those educational boats, because we're in dire need of supplemental programming, we'd love to get kids from the island on board, please stay, please help us. And so actually within the first month, Havenza came through with our first grant, and we were able to get high school students on board, and that really catapulted a relationship with the Department of Education. And so we've been here for 13 years and are really proud of that history, but it was a real fluke how it happened in the first place. But we started getting kids on the boat, and we've worked with thousands of kids in that time. Let me back up a little bit and tell you about World Ocean School's mission. So World Ocean School's mission is really about empowerment. And it's really about using authentic experiential opportunities to empower productive, responsible, and engaged community members. That, at the end of the day, that is our mission statement. And we do that through building transferable life skills. We do that through inspiring academic and vocational advancement. So really thinking about, for students particularly, if they that they haven't felt successful in school, having them feeling smart and capable. We do that through building strong relationships with caring and responsible adults. And we really, paramount to all of this is a safe environment for learning. So World Ocean School has evolved its mission a little bit over its history, but what really always rings true is this empowerment and through the lens of really authentic experiences. And let me show you a little bit about what that looks like. These are some before and afters. These were not staged. We had a photographer come down to the dock, and these, to be fair, these were taken in Boston, but I think it really helps depict the the student disengagement when they first show up off the school bus, and the engagement that we see once they're on board and they've got their hands on and they're really sailing. So there's lots of times when students come down and we think, gosh, they're not into this, they're not going to be into this, and they really get involved and get their hands on things. So we see it across the board time and time again, and it's part of the reason that I've stuck around as long as I have, because seeing that transition is really powerful. Skepticism to engagement, dismissiveness to joy. We have a student who wrote in her feedback as she got off the boat, she said, "I am strong and joyful." And if we can create that sort of impact, it's truly powerful. We put together this little video, and again, this was filmed. We had a pro bono photographer came on board, or videographer came on board to do a bit to try and get people to have a little bit better understanding of what it is we do and how we do it. So here's a short video.
World Ocean School is really unique in the education world in that we are able to provide an opportunity to students who wouldn't normally know about it or have access to it or be able to pay for it at all.
The mission of World Ocean School, at least in my eyes, is to inspire.
The range from excited to nervous to scared to kind of indifferent. Love watching what happens on the boat with the teaching.
It is difficult to reach some kids, but you could see it when you do. Seeing someone step out of their comfort zone, especially a kid with trust issues, especially when trust is such a big part of what we do here.
We have a whole academic curriculum that we go through with different groups of students depending on the length of time that they're here, but I think the things that really carry through the week are the community values above all.
Those values are maybe something they've never even been taught before. Being on board Roseway is a different experience. It's supposed to open your eyes to things.
Greater sense for how far respect can go and asking for help and working as a team as opposed to struggling through things on their own.
At the end of the week, I love to see when they want to come back on board Roseway, or if I talk to a kid and the kid says, I could live on here for a while. I could do this. And that's awesome, because I'll remember you did not think that at the beginning of the week. This kind of opportunity, it opens your eyes to things that you never thought possible.
So hopefully that gives a little bit of a sense of sort of the power and kids engaged in this process, and it being, while there's an academic curriculum to it, there's a lot of other stuff, a lot of other important values and connection that happen through their experiences. So in St. Croix, this is a little bit of what it looks like, from navigation skills to hauling on lines, getting in compartments. On average, students spend 5 days with us in our education programs, and so we have them raise the sails every day. The sails collectively weigh over 4,000 pounds. So they are involved fully in that process, and they are tired afterwards, and yet the satisfaction of having raised those sails is really significant, and I believe really helps then with the academic content. When you're feeling strong and when you're feeling capable, learning is so much more engaging. It's so much more fun and interesting to learn when you're feeling good about yourself. So they're really hands-on, from steering to hauling on the lines. All of this is a really immersive experience. What's interesting, over the years, we've really evolved our the students that we work with. For a period of time, when I first came on board, as I mentioned earlier, our first contract was with high school students, and our first group of students was high school. Then when we developed our relationship with the Department of Education, we started doing junior high programs. And what was really interesting when I came on board and saw those, they're really powerful programs. And there was a little bit of extra disengagement and saying, no, I've already made up my mind, school's not my thing. So that was a part that played into it. And additionally, I looked at the contract with the Department of Education and said, look, we're supposed to be aligning with curriculum standards. And we align very well with 5th grade science, math, history, and language arts. why don't we work on the 5th grade level? And so we really evolved lots of our programs to be at a little bit younger age group. And it's been really powerful. So for a number of years, we were able to work with every 5th grader in the public school system here on St. Croix. They all get 5 days with us of raising the sails and diving into curriculum-oriented lessons, getting in and out of the compartments, helping haul up the sails, helping furl the sails as they come down. Really immersive, interactive experience. By the end of the week, they sat on the end of the bowsprit and also had harnesses on and climbed the rig. So again, that combination of challenge and feeling really strong and capable and proud of themselves for doing something they never thought they could do. At the beginning of the week, kids are like, there is no way I'm going out there. There is no way. And then by the end of the week, this pride of saying, I did it, I did it, I did it. I faced my fears is a really powerful component. What's interesting is when the hurricanes hit, our board actually really questioned if St. Croix was a place that we should come, because will we deplete the resources from the community? Will there actually be an opportunity for us to add value? And so there's real question about whether we do. And I was really insistent that this is a community we've been a part of for so long. If there's any way we can help, we need to. And we came, and the reception was unbelievable. For many of you sitting here, people coming up to us and say, and they cried, their families cried when they saw Roseway's red sails coming in as a beacon of hope. And it was really touching for us. And as we evaluated what the needs were, with half of the schools condemned and students on split sessions, we decided we really needed to open up the boat as a classroom. In that time when the schools weren't available. And granted, we weren't going to be able to reach every student on the island, but we wanted to reach as many as possible who needed an outlet, either before they went to school and when their school day didn't start until 12:30, or for high school students, their school day ended at 11:30. And so come down to the boat and work with us. And what happened is it turned into a bit of a workforce development program. And so in addition to the sailing that we did and the curriculum integration that we did for high school students, we got them really involved in maintenance and learning about the boat and preserving a historic landmark and the pieces that our deckhands are a part of. And they really got to see that. So it turned into a junior deckhand program, basically. And some folks from industries said, can you send us your students? We're really impressed. And we really want that as our incoming workforce. And so that, coupled with a report that came out from FEMA around the needs of the territory, was the biggest need identified was in workforce development. Saying that the islands need workforce development, and the biggest sector that they claimed needed workforce development was the marine sector. And so we said, my gosh, if this is the case and this is true, this is an area that we can help. And so we built on this program and created a maritime academy. And we partnered with Central High School. So we offer a maritime academy at Central High School where some of the time we are in the classroom bringing either guests or hands-on experiences. So we have small boat engines that were donated that don't work. But we worked with students and showed them how the ins and outs. We took them apart, they took them apart, and they learned how to put them back together again and do small engine repair. They also came on board the boat and learned about our engines and our systems, from our generators to our water makers to the waste tanks, to understanding all of the different systems on board, as well as hands-on skills about being a deckhand and what it takes to really run the boat. So here's a couple of photos of them in the engine room, understanding a diesel engine and those systems. It was really about exposure to careers. And while some of that are careers that we could offer at World Ocean School and on the schooner Roseway, but some of it is about introducing students to careers right here in their backyard. So we worked with different local charter companies, we worked with tropical shipping, we worked with the Norma H and tugboats and Gold Coast yachts, and even lime trees on their lime tree terminals on their marine terminal. We got them connected and exposed to all of these marine careers right here in their backyard that are in need of a workforce. and this really lucrative career path that they can pursue, and help funnel them into those opportunities. So a couple of our students, we got into summer internships this last summer through Limetree, working on the marine terminal. One student was really interested in pursuing marine science, and so we helped her get scuba certified, and she's now in a program at UVI in marine science. We had a young woman spend 2 weeks with us up in New England on a summer program. So really trying to expose these students to a range of careers and then help facilitate those opportunities and help funnel them into pathways that are really productive. So lots of people say to us, well, gosh, how do you measure the impact of this? You know, what is the success? And a tool that we started using with some of our partners in Boston is called the Holistic Student Assessment. And so many people, you know, think about quantifying how the impact of this sort of thing, and really think about test scores and retention in schools and dropout rates and looking at some of those sorts of things. But the holistic student assessment is a little bit different. It's looking at social emotional skills. So it actually measures, I don't know if you can read this, action orientation, emotion control, assertiveness, trust, empathy, reflection, and optimism. And these are actually, I should have updated this. We have some new results from this summer's work in Boston. And the difference between pre and post, so the pre numbers are in the gray and the red are the post numbers. So pre-program and post-program, we see growth in all of these areas. And as I say, as the years have gone by, we've actually seen more growth in these areas. And it's the social emotional growth of saying that these students feel more confident, they feel more productive, they feel more engaged and confident in themselves to move through the world in a way that, again, goes back to our mission statement, building productive, responsible, and engaged community members. So we put together a video, and again, this is Boston, but keep in mind, this is a program, this young woman from St. Croix, actually we had multiple St. Croix students this last year come up and do our summer ambassador program. Zandy and Rick's daughter has done the program. Lots of St. Croix kids over the years have had an opportunity. The footage from this particular voyage is not with any St. Croix students, but it gives you a sense of that type of programming. One quick note before I play it, this school that's highlighted is actually specifically for students who have either aged out or dropped out of Boston Public Schools. They're considered off track. And unfortunately, I think about it as the school system failed them, right? And it didn't work with a traditional academic system. But watch what happens when they spend 2 weeks aboard Roseway.
When a group of people gather together and they have similar values or they're able to agree upon something, it's just like, it's beautiful, because that's when you like make all these connections, and that's how real growth can happen.
We sailed all the way to New York and back within a matter of like 10 days. We're already back in Boston. We raise a 2,000-pound sail almost every day. It's amazing to see how a team of people can do that together.
Oh my gosh. A typical day, I feel like, is like so different than at home. Like, instead of sleeping in, instead of not doing anything, watching TV, it's like you wake up and you feel refreshed.
You literally are now a deckhand, so you grab the ropes and you start hauling away.
I've learned how to steer the helm. That's been so fun. I feel like a boss when I'm on the helm. Like, I just feel amazing. And just seeing like the ocean behind me and I'm like in the middle of it, I'm like, whoa!
And believe it or not, when it rains, it gets crazy, but the dance parties get crazy too, you know? You gotta get crazy with the dance parties. And that's another thing I realized, like, I would have expected when it's raining, nobody wanted to do anything, but everybody was like, it was just like such an adventure. I felt like I was in a movie.
Yes, developing sailing skills is a really cool part of this program, and seeing students really take ownership of the vessel. But in a larger sense, I think the biggest goal in my eyes is to introduce students to a really healthy, loving, and supportive community and give them skills to be able to go back home and build that themselves or look for that in their lives.
The crew and the students make this trip pretty fun. If no one wanted to like raise the sail together or make sure the ship is constantly in check by taking turns, and if no one was trying to like help each other, you wouldn't even be able to move that far.
Are you having a great time?
Well, because after I get off that boat, I'm gonna know that before I took 40 days where I had no phone, where I, didn't take a shower, where I didn't have anything like cold, any cold drinks, and I'm gonna know I can do that. I'm strong enough to do that. So what else am I strong enough to do? Woo!
You guys get it?
Yeah, we got it.
It literally takes you out of your comfort zone, and it puts you somewhere where you just gotta adapt quickly, very quickly, and you just gotta expand your experience. You see new things, you make new friends. I feel like it helps you with your responsibility.
I like that we get to be honest and we get to reflect throughout the day and then come together and talk about it. I like that we start off with improvements and end off with shout outs, because you don't want to end off with something negative.
We talk about what can go better and what what we did right and what we could improve. And those improvements that we say, those stay in the back of my head. And I'm pretty sure they're gonna stay in the back of my head even after this trip is gone.
I become more confident in what I have to say, and I feel like what I have to say I just thank everybody on this boat for listening to what I have to say. I feel like it's helped me a lot, and I won't be scared enough to say what I have to say.
Having an ear to listen is very important, as sometimes when you say whatever you want to say and no one is listening, it feels as if why bother talking. But when you're speaking and you have an audience to listen and to really hear what you have to say, it's really nice to know that you have people that you can depend on.
That was one of the things that I felt like I needed. And before this trip, I felt like I didn't need nobody but myself to push. But I found that it could be okay to lean on others sometimes, in those tough situations.
If you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. If you give simple acts of kindness, if you give simple supports to others, they will reciprocate it, because people really do appreciate that. A lot of people have felt nervous to come here. And I think just those simple acts of kindness, those simple signs of support, they've really made a big difference for all of us.
Just by checking up on somebody goes a long way, and I'm gonna keep that in the back of my head. Not everybody gets care or love from people. Some people go throughout the whole day without talking. Some people get no compliments throughout the day, but just by saying, yo, are you good? You good? That makes them feel a little better, because it shows that people care. So stuff those little things, I'm definitely bringing with me back home.
You are my sailboat, the one with campers. Believe when I say I love the Roseway.
Tell me why.
Because it sails us where we wanna go.
Tell me why.
Because the pro crew laughing wanna joke.
Tell me why.
I never wanna hear you say I slept through the anchor watch.
It's satisfying. 'Cause, you know, I feel like now I could just see anything, you know? Like, it's just sick. Like anything is possible, like I could reach the stars, you know? Like, for real.
Open up. You won't regret it. These people are gonna love you to death. They're gonna show you something that you've never felt before, and it's gonna be different.
Oh, what's that? Is this still rolling?
Yeah. Welcome to Roseway.
So they have a pretty good time on board, as you can see. So I wanted to share that, you know, as I said, it's a Boston program, and yet it's a really high impact program. And St. Croix students have experienced programs like this, and it's incredibly transformative, and they're really life-changing, and we're really proud to do it. But as you see, part of the other value in that is you see a little bit about some of the things that happen, right? There are dance parties, spontaneous dance parties in the rain. They always do. We have to stand anchor watch every night. The students do to make sure the boat doesn't drag, and they participate in all of those activities. And to keep them awake for an hour, that we do silly activities like have them write a rap that then they perform in the morning. So you saw a little bit of that portrayed. So thanks for watching that. So the last thing I want to run through, and I know I'm almost out of time, is just the ongoing maintenance and preservation, stewarding this historic landmark. Our passion and the reason we do all of this is for the kids and these educational opportunities, but we still have a 94-year-old schooner. And so there's always, every year there's yard and every year there's maintenance. Here's a couple of shots of the scale of things. We replaced 2 years ago, we replaced a 94-year-old piece of her rudder trunk. And it's just this massive, this picture here, is the 94-year-old piece, and we had our shipwrights build the other one. The scale of this is just huge, really massive, and a labor of love, and thankfully there's some really talented people who help us out with this. Here's another photo of just sort of the scale of the planks and the frames and all that. When you need to dig in, you have to take parts apart. Take a lot apart to get in there, and then replace what you need to and cover it back up. So we're proud to do this work, and we are proud to have folks on board. If you have not been on board Roseway, please do. We do public sales here in St. Croix, and lots of times our students come back, and we actually encourage any student who's come back, their families, and they sail for free. And otherwise we do public sales, and it just is a revenue generator and awareness raiser for the work that we do. So this is another shot of us sailing in St. Croix, and if you haven't, please come out with us. And at the very least, just call me up. My card's up here. If we can even give you a tour on board, it'd be really fun to host you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have.